Welcome to the SRMC Tribe podcast. Today's guest is Gail, a story of international crisis and disaster management and recovery, covering everything from the tsunami in Phuket to the Germanwings plane crash and the mass murder of all the passengers. This should be a topic that most people don't know much about. I'm sure it's going to be interesting. Gail, thanks for agreeing to do the podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
One of our early guests. Normally sort of start with, how we sort of know each other. Obviously you're a lecturer on the SRMC course and assess all our level 5 and level 6 work, or students' work, sorry. Perhaps a good way of doing this is maybe start from the beginning of kind of how your story kind of comes into the SRMC then, perhaps.
Well, I'm probably a bit different to most of the people that you come into contact with because I have a really pure aviation beginning. Pure aviation, cabin crew, started with British Airways, and I did a secondment into their safety, and I think it was their SEP, their Safety and Emergency Procedures Department, and thought, hello, I quite like this. And then when I left British Airways, I joined, naively probably, a mass fatality disaster management company, thinking, oh, well, that'll be very similar to what I did at British Airways. And within 3 months of joining, I found myself working in the mortuaries in Phuket after the Thailand tsunami, having never seen a dead body in my life. So I found myself in a whole new world, whole new industry that I thought, actually, I can do this. It didn't throw me at all. And from there, I stayed with the organisation a while, left to go into academia, but always stayed as a responder. So I've always had that dual life of, it's a bit like Indiana Jones. During the day, I was an associate professor, and then I would go off and do plane crashes, terrorist attacks, natural disasters, that kind of thing. And met you guys through a mutual friend, and you said, would you come and do a guest lecture for us on the kind of work that you do? I said yes, and that's, the rest is kind of history,
I'm trying
really.
to think how long ago that was. It's got to be 5-6 years.
Got to be.
Began.
I think it's pre-COVID.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this. I think it's 2019 when I first came up here to do a lecture on the SRMC course.
Strange, you said the tsunami in Phuket. Actually, two of the guests this week have both mentioned that in their sort of story.
Yeah, defining moment for me, job-wise.
I was going to Phuket on holiday at that time. Luckily,
Yeah, a few holidays there, didn't you?
Yeah, I've been there a few times. But what was the original plane crash? And oh no, sorry. Did you respond to Phuket straight away?
Yeah.
And for the whole duration of...
And that was when the first few months of the role?
Yeah. I went out a week after it happened. So they were still setting up the mortuaries. They were still setting up the labs for DNA and data and collating all that information. So, I was there within a week. And then I was doing month on, month off for about, I think it was 6, 7, even 8 months. It became normal to come home, have some time in the office working, and then go back out working out there.
And what was your perception when you first moved into that role and you weren't expecting it necessarily to be as full on as that? Or you must have had an idea there was someone that was involved?
Yeah, sorry.
Just like that
the
transition
organisation
to that.
Were very good and said, we will support you and make sure that you are ready before you go into that. And of course, what nobody predicted was something as
biblical,
monumental as the tsunami within the first 3 months. I have to say they didn't force me to do it. I said, I will do this, and they handled it really well. But I found myself within 3 months of joining, and it was, for me personally, it was the best thing that I could have done for my learning trajectory. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as a way of doing it for everybody else, but it worked for me. I got to understand how mortuaries worked, how you disaster victim identification, DNA processes, repatriation of human remains, all of those things. It was almost like having a really intense learning experience that I would have probably had over a couple of years. Within 6 months, I had experienced firsthand all of that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, actually, you started answering it there, but yeah, did the role really entail when you fly out there? What's the first thing you're seeing, and what's your process from there?
Yeah. Well, my role normally when I respond is dual role. Senior Incident Director as part of the GO team. And GO team is the first team that goes out to, when the client calls, I don't go individually, I go on behalf of.
So who would be the client on that one?
I was wondering, who actually pays? Who's paying for a disaster company?
It could be a government.
Right.
It could be an airline. It could be transport company, cruise lines, banks. So these days, it's anybody.
If, say, an airline had lost 20 people in that country with that disaster, you would only be going there for those 20 people.
Absolutely.
Right.
So the organisation that I responded on behalf of were there for a specific government. So we were there to look after citizens of that government. So I know before I go who the client is. I don't respond individually. I respond on behalf of a mass disaster company that I am on their books. I'm a senior associate. I'm part of the GO team. They phone me and say, this client has had an incident. I usually know before they phone me. And we need you to go and respond for them. So I will turn up with a team of experienced people. Normally I know them all, not always, but quite often. And it'll be a mix. It'll be forensics, it'll be logistics, finance, who are always my best friend because I always need cash flow to pay for things, transport. And we will set up the infrastructure for a family assistance centre and or mortuaries so that we can support the families of those that have died, survivors, should there be anybody, and of course start securing crash sites, recovering remains, working with the investigation teams to ensure that all personal effects and everything that they need is collated, collected, identified. So we know what we're doing. We collect, human remains. The guys in the mortuary team would set up the mortuary. I would normally be setting up a family assistance centre, and I know how to do that. I know what needs to be in there. And I'm waiting for the families or the survivors to come to the centre so that we can support them and get them the help and the perhaps identification or the return of their loved ones, whatever they need.
So I just explain how the sort of financial model. I know there's only a few sort of disaster type, crisis disaster companies.
Yeah.
It's 3 or 4 big ones. If correct me if I'm wrong. So how does that work then? Obviously, people are not sat around waiting. Who is it, like an insurance model, or do they pay per when something happens? You have to pay.
It's a retainer.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, from an aviation point of view, there are regulations about that. They have to have the ability to either respond on their own, and nobody has that facility. Nobody has those experienced people within their staff. Or they have to pay a retainer to an organisation that will respond on their behalf. But of course, I liken it to a Formula One team.
Well, take a drink.
Cold, just sitting in.
Yeah, kicking in.
We'll have a cough off now.
I liken it to a Formula One team. That there are times when it's full on, intense, changing wheels, all of that kind of thing. But we don't just sit around waiting for the next one. We're training people. We're working with clients to build those relationships, understand what their needs are, looking at risk assessment, SOPs, processes, research, all of those things. We're really busy in between.
Yeah.
It's just that everything stops when there's a response.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. Obviously, we know a bit of this story. We've heard elements over the years. But if we could just go back then to that first one, just because that's really interesting to me. You've obviously gone into the aftermath of a tsunami in that first job. I obviously said a few of the tasks that are on, but what was it like? You literally straight off the plane and then you're into disaster. Would you be able to go back there and sort of go through what that process looked like?
Yeah.
What was the first thing you had to do? And I know without naming names, but the task would be quite interesting for people here.
Well, you land, and that's the first thing to get over,
Right.
is the shock of the devastation that surrounds you. And you never get used to that. I've never got used, I know it's coming, but I've never got used to that first initial, when you step onto a crash site or a tsunami or a fire or terrorism, the after effect, the what that looks like. But there was no infrastructure, of course, and we couldn't add to their infrastructure. We couldn't add to their initial problems. They can't be looking after us when they should be looking after others. So you're quite often in a sleeping bag or, sleeping in an office or very basic facilities. We know that as the Go team. We know we're not going to be in the Hilton 5-star Wedgwood suite. But there were hotels, obviously. There were hotels available with hotel rooms available for obvious reasons that we could occupy, but they had no infrastructure, really. That had all gone. And one of our jobs is to bring that infrastructure back. So the team built a mortuary using what was available locally. So one of the initial places that we had to store equipment and bodies initially was the Buddhist temple. And that was a really positive thing because at least you know that bodies are treated with respect, ultimate respect. None of us were allowed to touch a body regardless of nationality. We couldn't go onto the site. We couldn't do anything until we had been blessed by the Buddhist monk. And I still have the little necklace that he put round my neck once I was blessed, and you could not go through. And that's fine. Culturally, we understood that. So I've got big strapping lads who have all got their little Buddhist necklace thing on. So it's almost like an ID. And slowly you build the infrastructure. But that is our job, to build the rooms that's needed for the data processing, for the disaster victim identification, where to store the bodies, where they do the identification, where we do the repatriation. And we were using hotel conference rooms because, of course, they weren't needed. So, but they may not have had electricity. So we were using generators that were being brought in from Thailand or other places in Thailand, Vietnam, wherever. But that took a while for that to all get set up.
These must be pretty ginormous insurance policies for the level of things you were doing. You were involved in way outside sorting out the electricity, the hotel rooms,
Yeah.
building infrastructure. Where does our policy
Millions.
begin and end? And sort of,
Well, it begins and ends with the insurance company. I can only spend what the insurance company allow me to spend.
Something
But-
of that scale was obviously a big international governments responding to that as well. It was a huge response team for that.
Huge.
You'd think as well, obviously, if somebody doesn't know how it works, there'd be loads of politics of going into a country, because obviously that country's kind of asking for help, really.
Yeah. We don't go in unless they ask for help.
Right.
So if a country doesn't ask for help, we can't go in. And yes, there is politics. And sometimes they will let one nationality in, but they won't let another. We had that when I was in Libya for an air crash there. Just at the start of all the trouble they had there, they would not let anybody with a US passport. So it doesn't matter how good you were. If you were in the GO team with a US passport, you were not going into Libya. So we understand that. We were in Russia. I didn't go to Russia, but we went as a company into Russia. And there were certain nationalities that they weren't keen.
Yeah, Russia never been known for asking for help for outside countries.
No. So we take all of that on board. Yeah, there is politics. And I suggest that will only increase.
I don't even know how common tsunamis actually. Obviously, it was like,
we
it's
had
a biblical
Japan.
thing, wasn't it?
Japan had a big one, didn't they?
2011 for Japan. But it doesn't have to be a tsunami. I mean, you've got Grenfell, you've got Manchester Arena bombings, you've got all of these things are out there. There's recently been a similar Grenfell tower in Spain. So the processes are the same. It's just that the context changes.
So say if somebody was like the companies who get insurance for these sort of things, can an organisation pay for the crisis company then if they haven't got insurance?
Yeah.
And they go, can we? That not work?
Tricky.
That's tricky, because then why would I pay a retainer when I can just phone you when something happens?
Doesn't work as a model, does it? For business?
It doesn't work as a model, but clearly, if there was something like Gaza or something like that was an international issue, then that may be slightly different.
Okay. What was the so after obviously there's a pretty big introduction to that world. What was the first plane crash you had to deal with?
Quite a small one actually, and it was in the UK. So that was different again, because I was used to having a free rein to do what I needed. And of course, you go to a disaster in the UK and the police are in charge or the army's in charge. So very much having to work under their direction and with them, very much a supportive role. And that's fine, absolutely fine.
Now, when you say it was small, is that in terms of bodies? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, 2 bodies, small commercial aircraft, but a light aircraft. Yeah.
And your role there is like repatriating the bodies, or is there a bit more to it than that? There is more.
Family. I normally look after the families.
Liaising with families.
Yeah, I tend to look after the families.
There's so much to it, isn't there? Kind of for us, obviously we don't know much about this world. There's so much to it, and so I would imagine the politics in the UK are even worse than.
But it's straightforward.
Yeah, 'cause you know who's in
I
charge.
have lines of demarcation, and I know who's in charge, and I know who I answer to, and I know what I can do, and I know what I can't do. So actually, it's okay, because I know that I probably will have to wait a while to be asked to come in, set up a family assistance centre, or go to families' homes and support them there.
Yeah, here's one for you. I suppose just like if you're in the military, where I suppose there's a level of excitement if there's a conflict, or it's as bad as it sounds because people are going to die, but I suppose there's some form of excitement when a plane crash is as bad as that sounded.
Excitement.
There's an adrenaline rush. Of course there is. Absolutely. There's an adrenaline rush.
I presume the main thing, obviously, with your background that you've been involved in is around the aviation side.
Yeah, that is my background, yeah. But as I said, these days, because aviation is so regulated, has so much legislation, that the best practice from aviation is now adopted by most other industries, be it banking, cruise, transport, trains. The process is actually pretty much the same as for aviation now.
Now, how's your role changed then, as you've obviously got experience in that arena? Obviously, you went in that first tsunami, and then I'm assuming your role's changed over the years with your experience. How does that look? You like incident manager? What sort of roles are there?
Because I'm senior incident director, that means I'm managing that family assistance centre.
Right.
So now, actually, I don't get to work with families as much. I'm usually working with the governments, the ambassadors, doing the political stuff, making sure that the crisis communications has gone out, reporting on the data. There's a lot more data now than there ever was before, justifying rightly, I'm not saying that it's not right, how the money's being spent, how are we adding value, so that I was never asked to justify money in the beginning. Now I am, and that's right that happens.
I've been interested to know, obviously your background was in aviation, obviously going from air crew, is that right?
Cabin crew.
Cabin crew, air crew. So what's the general background of most of the people that work in that space then? Doing that sort of role?
Some aviation.
Okay.
Because it's so regulated, what has to happen. Forensics.
Okay, yeah.
Logistics. So we get a lot of ex-police, fire, military, less military.
There's obviously a big search element to this job. You'd think there'd be more from that. But.
Well, when you've spoke on course, actually, the level of interest of military guys around it has been high, where most of them, I don't know, it was an area that we didn't really know much how they seem. You obviously see it you kind of see it in Hollywood films, don't you? All the different agencies, but how does it all work, sort of thing. I didn't even know there's.
Well, I don't think people really. They kind of realise that somebody has to go in and clean up the mess, but the magic happens, and nobody really understands that there are people whose job it is to go in once something has gone wrong and clean it up. And don't forget, behind me is another group of people who have to clear up the salvage, the wreckage. And they're a completely different company. Now, I work closely with them, but they can't go in and do their job until I've finished my job. So they have to actually go in and physically clean up the mess.
NGOs involved in this?
Yes, sometimes. Certainly with the big tsunamis and things, yeah.
What's the most, I presume, just must be the most thing these types of companies do is aviation plane crashes?
Yeah. That's the bread and butter, unfortunately.
There's a couple of plane crashes every year, I presume?
Touch wood. There was, we haven't had one for a while.
Touch wood.
But yeah, a couple of years.
So we asked a question about careers and how to get into that space. Obviously, when you teach on the SRMC, it definitely opens people's eyes to it as a potential area to maybe go into. One, what sort of backgrounds are people generally from that work in that space? And two, is there something in there, maybe the military backgrounds or fire brigade or services background that might be suitable?
Even the qualities of a person as well, perhaps.
Yeah.
Not just this.
It's so varied. I mean, literally anyone could do this. But generally, the people who are attracted to doing this kind of work are ex-coppers or serving, fire, paramedics, military background, search and rescue. We even have, people who work with mountain rescue, But also people who are very good at logistics and finance and admin and data collation, because I can't do that. We have people who are counsellors, although we don't counsel at family assistance. It's not a counselling environment. But
okay, that's what, I thought it might have been. So what is that role then when you're talking family assistance?
You are there to listen. You are a practical help when people are at their absolute lowest. Yeah. They often come to us in the Family Assistance Centre.
You must naturally be doing a bit of counselling.
No,
you're not.
absolutely
you have
not.
to keep it really separate from that.
100%.
Right.
100%. Because we don't want to start something that we can't finish. I'm only going to see these families for a couple of weeks. So I don't want to open them up to counselling when I can't take them on. The counselling comes later. This is proper trauma support. So these are people who, and it's as basic as people who are so paralysed with the trauma of losing their loved one either in a terrorist attack or in a plane crash. And it's supporting them so they can get the answers that they need from the authorities as a conduit, if you will, to the guidance and the advice that they might need around finances, legal, all of those sort of things. But also, I always say to people, it's holding families' hands through the bureaucracy of death. Death is very bureaucratic anyway. When there isn't a body, or it's in a foreign land, or how they died is open to debate, or there isn't enough body to identify, that leaves people legally vulnerable. So it's about understanding what their rights are, what money can they get, what support can they get, what are their choices when they want to repatriate their loved one. Do they want to wait until we've got all the pieces? Do they want to go ahead once we've got a positive identification? So really quite basic human conversations with families to empower them to make the decisions that they need to make in what is the worst
it must be so
time
difficult
of their life.
That to as being naturally empathetic people, I think we all are, definitely the three of us say here, or that must be really challenging as well to have those conversations and keep it that not professional is the wrong word, but
it is professional, and it doesn't mean
not
you
going
can't
down that route.
Yeah, don't go down a route you can't. Stick to your swim lane.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It doesn't mean I can't be compassionate. It doesn't mean I can't be empathetic. People say to me, "How do you not cry in these situations?" Of course, I cry. I might not do it in front of the families, but I might have to go and have a little cry, sort the makeup out in my hotel room, and then come back. Yeah.
So when we're talking about the makeup of the sort of person that comes and does this job, that's got to be a big element, the strength of character and mind to be able to do something like that. I know we sort of jumped in as you were saying, some of the interesting roles there that people can, or backgrounds they can come from, but that's got to be
background.
key.
It's for me, it's not the background that matters. Although, if you are familiar with working with death and families, that helps. Which is why the services are quite good at this, because it's what they've always done. But it doesn't mean you can't do it if you have an admin background or a data background. Not all the roles at a family assistance centre involve direct contact with families. You could still come and work at the centre and be really useful and never have contact with families. And still be a vital part of the team. But for me, it's the skills and the characteristics of people that I want. I want people who don't have an ego and don't need to be the centre of attention, because it's not about us, it's about the families.
That's Boonix out then.
I want people that have resilience, yet emotional intelligence, who are able to compartmentalise, which I think is probably my greatest strength, because it doesn't mean that I don't feel it. I'm just able to suspend that side of me for a more appropriate place. I need people who are resilient, who are disciplined, who don't need to be in a 5-star hotel, who don't need to have a break every 2 hours because the hours are long, because we're not working on our schedule. I'm working on family schedules. And often they don't sleep that much at the beginning of a trauma. So I'm looking for people who've got those characteristics and those skills rather than the job role.
I was going to ask how big the teams are, but I imagine that's dependent on the type of disaster.
Yeah.
But in a general team, is there a general sort of, makeup of a team and roles? Is there a specific, this person, they do the data processing, this person does that?
Yeah.
What sort of roles are there?
Well, a couple of people per role.
Okay.
So that you're not on 24 hours a day. And it will, the logistics team, initially, we may have 3 or 4 people on that team. Transport, because if you're flying families in or you're organising coffins to go out, that's going to be a busy period. SAT members, special assistants, team members who work with the families, you may have 3 or 4 families that you're looking after. But if you've got 100 families, we're still going to need 30, 40, 50 SATs. You can have a cast of hundreds, or it can be 2 or 3 people, depending on the size and the profile of who's on board.
Can this be a full-time role for someone then to be on standby, or is it just you're on call if anything
I choose to do it as freelance, but I have done it as my full-time career role. Yeah. I chose, because I wanted to go into academia and I wanted to write and I wanted to do other things, I chose to do it freelance. But there are people who this is their job, yes.
Just one for you. Sort of one of the guests we had in this week, Barry, was talking about he headed up a maritime security company, had 1,000 Marines working for him at one point. And he recognises, obviously, there's a lot of guys who've been to different conflicts over the years. So he put in place, one of the things he's sort of most proud of was trim training for the staff, in case, sort of...
trauma risk incident management. Yeah. That's the military version of it, I think. But
there are CISM, all of those things.
I mean, for our internal staff, there's a lot of continuous trauma. Is it things in place for that as an industry 100%. Or just collectively with the company? With
the company. I have worked for, as a disclaimer, there are 3 major companies in the UK. I've worked for 2 of them. I won't name them, but you can easily look them up if you Google. And that is in place. And because one of my roles, because of my background in organisational psychiatry and psychology, I tend to head up the mental health team. So I'm quite passionate about making sure that we don't cause trauma, unnecessary trauma to the people who are stepping into those roles. So yes, there is support.
A lot of the things that you're seeing, obviously they're all different. They're kind of, you can make an argument you're never supposed to see any of that sort of stuff in a life. It's a pretty, I would imagine this sort of job has a bit of a shelf life for some people, and for some people different.
Yes. And actually, it's really interesting you mentioned that, Pete. I would say most people do this once.
Okay, that's interesting.
And that's enough. And they've seen what they want to see, and they've added value to the human race. And I get that. For me, that's enough. The group of people that do this as a job is very small. You call on bigger rings of people. But you're absolutely right. And what I always say is, as head of mental health, I can't help you unsee what you've seen. So be really sure that you feel able to see what you need to see. We don't let people go to the crash site unless they are vital. Nobody goes into a mortuary unless they are trained to do so or it's necessary. My husband, who is in the same industry, will never let anybody into the mortuary unless they have a role that requires them to be in there, because there isn't enough therapy in the world to take away what you've seen. So the training is excellent before you go, but there is nothing that prepares you for the real life, the smells, the sights, the sounds. I can't train that. I can't teach that. And for some people, that's it.
Yeah, and every human sort of takes it differently, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, we have people that have PhDs in certain science topics that would be related to this. And they say, yes, I'd like to do this. And my question is always, have you seen a dead body in your training? Because you can get to PhD level and have never seen a dead body. And if the first time you see a dead body is if it's in 100 pieces and it's hit the side of a mountain, that's possibly not...
That's not the time.
The time. And if you can't cope with it, then you've just wasted 8 years of a master's and a PhD. So you do have to... And I remember really, really clearly, I've only ever seen bodies that have been fragmented or decomposed due to water. So the first time I saw a human body that had died naturally, I was quite shocked because I'd never seen one that was whole before.
You must be like the first person named on a dinner party invite.
Well, or the last, because my husband and I can clear a dinner party in about 6 seconds, which is why we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Because there is only a certain audience that people are really fascinated, but we both know that if we tell them, they won't be able to handle it, so we don't tell them. We don't talk about it.
So dealing with that level of trauma is not for everyone, clearly. We've been around a bit in our lives, and certainly wouldn't say I enjoyed it, but I don't think I could go to that level of what you're doing. What is it in your character that enables you to maybe handle that better than others?
I wish I knew, because then I could market it. But I do think the fact that I have all my qualifications are around organisational psychiatry and psychology. Perhaps, I don't know, it's a self-awareness of what needs to be done, because I understand how the brain works, but I honestly don't know. I did not know when I turned up in Thailand whether I could do it or not. And we have highly experienced people that turn up to do this for the first time and cannot cope and ask to be put on a plane home. So I don't know. I don't have PTSD. Yes, we all have to have a certain amount of support and therapy after we've deployed. I don't dream about it. I don't think about it.
Do you have a particular coping strategy you use then? Do you think there's something that you do that helps?
Yes, actually. While I'm away, I journal because I think you have to get it out of here. So I write it all down.
About the experience you're going through?
Yeah, I'll write it all down.
That's ready for a book, that, isn't it?
No, I throw it away. I throw it away because I never have to read it again, but I have to get it out of there.
Okay, that's good.
I don't feel a need to go to therapy. I'm a counsellor myself. There's no way I'm going to counselling because I know how this works. So, but for me, I have to be out. When I come home from a deployment, I have a really strong urge to be outside, gardening, walking. I do a lot of walking. I'll walk the dog. I'll be in the garden, nature, those sorts of things. And I think there is an element of that cleanses before I have to do it again.
Fascinating. So just moving from that then, so that obviously you're still involved in that space now.
Yeah.
But the big change for you was obviously getting into academia.
Yeah.
What made you step into that from that role and obviously stay in it?
Well, I've always liked that academic side of things. I've always had that academic creating courses, writing, that sort of thing. So that's what drew me to it. And then I was given the opportunity to create a master's course that was about aviation, but had this in it. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to write, I wanted to research, and that gave me the avenues to be able to do it. So that's why I went into academia.
And somewhere you think you'll finish your career in academia?
No. I will finish my career. And I've kind of moved into a new space now. I'm just finishing my academic career. I've done 14 years. It's been great. But now I don't need those channels open to me. Those channels are open to me without being in academia. So I've written a book. I'm just writing my second book. I know how to write an article. I know how to get it published. So I'm doing that now. So it gives me the freedom to work on legacy, which I know is an overused and trite word. But I'm kind of at that place in my career where I feel very strongly that I have a duty to enable the next generation of people that will do my job. And if that is mentoring, coaching, writing, researching, conferences, supporting, offering guest lectures, working with airlines and different companies to share my experiences so that nobody has to walk into a tsunami like I did and be thrown in at the deep end and, excuse the pun, and never having seen a dead body, never knowing what's going to happen to them. I want to encourage the next generation, be they female or male, and there's a lot more women now. When I did it, I was usually the only one, but now there is a lot more women. But the younger generations to take over this industry and move it forward. That I feel strongly that's my duty now.
The point you brought up there about the women in industry, obviously there's more coming into it now. But the same if you look at security across the board, for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to attract as many women as does men, but it should do.
Yeah.
We could give you examples. Every time we've run a SRMC course and there's been women on it, they've tended to be top student.
Yes.
Which tells you something. So, what would be your advice on maybe, some of the women that we know leaving the forces that may be thinking about stepping into careers, not necessarily in aviation security, but in security as a whole, on overcoming those challenges, thinking they are going to be in the minority, which they are to start with.
Well, look, and you are. And I think it's recognising that you are going to be sometimes the only woman. It is 2024, but we still have some more traditional attitudes around the capabilities, perhaps, of women. And I think it's just having confidence that if you know what your job is, and that's what it's always been for me, I know what my job is. If you have an issue with me doing my job, that's not my issue. That's your issue. And I'm not responsible for that. You're responsible for that. And I think for women coming into this industry, and there are a lot more women now, a lot of my close colleagues within the industry are hugely capable women that have been doing this for years. And they're all confident in their experience, their abilities, the job that they have to do. Strong. I'm not going to say that I'm a shrinking violet, because I'm not. And being able to not let it bother you. The fact that when I'm with you guys and I'm at SRMC, quite often I'll be the only female there, or one or two. Everybody towers above me. Most people are military. Doesn't bother me at all. So I think it's about having confidence that I know that I'm the only person in that room that can talk about what I do because I'm probably the only one that's done it.
Yep.
Sure.
That nothing else is my issue.
Brilliant.
I feel like we need to go back a little bit here to obviously aviation is the area you specialise in.
Yeah.
You must have obviously been involved in numerous sort of plane crashes. I think from before you were involved in the Germanwings.
Yes.
That was pretty unique where, correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, where the co-pilot, sorry, but because of 9/11, the doors, they changed when the door gets locked. There's a sort of different control measure which caused, obviously the main pilot went to the toilet, I believe, and then the co-pilot committed mass murder and killed everyone on the plane, which is actually, when I ended up going on an echo chamber at times, I remember reading about it at times, it's pretty common actually. Not common, but there's been quite a lot of those over the years. That must have been a pretty unique one to go to where the pilot has killed hundreds of people on a plane.
And it's really interesting you bring that one up. I say I don't have PTSD, but that's the one where I had to not deploy for a couple of months after. Okay. Emotionally, that was so intense because I am supporting families who know exactly how their loved ones died. And I don't want to go into details because it's not suitable for me to do so and it would not be appropriate for me to do so. But that was probably out of the 43 activations that I've done, and some have just been one dead, some have been mass, that's the worst that I've ever had to attend in terms of what it took out of me physically, emotionally and psychologically. Even
where it was, up in the mountains as well,
the
altitude, I'm assuming, as well, had an impact.
Yeah.
You might know, in MH370, the one they never found, that's, well, I don't suppose they know, they don't know if that was crashed purposefully or just...
And we'll never know.
Have they found that one at all?
They found bits of it.
Yeah, your role, you're not getting involved in the mechanism of how things have happened. You're there to support.
No, and that's a really good point, Duncan. Yeah. I am always a supportive role. Yeah. The investigation teams, NTSB, AAIB, who are the investigation boards, will always be in charge. Yeah. We support them. They are the ones that control who goes onto crash sites, who does what and when. But I always work really closely with them and have always had a very good relationship with them. But I know who's in charge and it's not me.
Yeah, Grenfell, was you involved in that one at all?
I was, but from a secondary, I didn't go to Grenfell. I actually worked the Crisis Management Centre at the company headquarters for the company that deployed me, and worked as a psychological mental health for the teams that were going in. And sometimes I choose not to go because that means that I can have a much more objective, almost not remote, but a step back, and I can support the teams that are doing that. You also reach an age where climbing up ladders and being, climbing over rocks and things is not quite as appealing as it used to be.
Well, I take it must be the worst for you was the first one, I presume, as in the scale of it, the tsunami.
It stayed with me, but it wasn't as impactful on me as Germanwings was. That was, I didn't deploy for a while after that. I was drained and I needed a bit of space from it. Obviously I went back to it, but I just knew I'd given everything to that and I was tired and I needed a bit of space from it.
You still deploy now though, Gail, would you? And you plan to do that for a fair few years yet?
I don't know.
Yeah. Where do you think you're going to have the biggest impact on that sector then? Just in matters of, you're trying to change elements of it, whether it's through training or...
Change. Influence, change, regulators, I do a lot more work now with regulators and legislation and that kind of thing, as a supportive role, as an advisor, as a guide, and I can see, and I write, and I can see me moving more into that. I've loved deploying. I've done 43, but it is physically quite demanding, and there's a next generation to do that bit.
I bet it's hard to say no, but it must be like a bit of a buzz on each one.
Yeah, of course, absolutely, 100%.
Any ones perhaps we wouldn't know about, which, you know, the sort of, I'd say wackiest is the wrong word to say, but, you know, what's the most extreme one you've seen?
No, I tend to do the high profile ones. So all the ones that I do, you would undoubtedly know about. Yeah, I tend to get called for quite high profile ones.
What was the Russian plane or a Ukrainian plane that was shot down?
MH17.
MH17.
Well, interestingly, of course, I happened to be in Austria with a group of students doing some research when that happened. And of course, the company said, you are the closest person, pack your bags, you're going, fine. And within an hour, I'd had a phone call to say the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, you can't go. They're not letting anybody in. So actually there was a disaster victim identification. A DVI team went in from Holland, who are the world experts in DVI, and they went in with an investigatory team for a very limited amount of time to collect black box, etc. evidence, but there was no family assistance. There was nothing like that happened.
Oh, probably because of the Russian thing.
Yeah, we weren't able to go in.
There was one. What was the one that was shot? It was one shot down on a runway a couple of years ago by Iran shooter.
In Pakistan, I don't know. Sorry,
where they accidentally shot it, thinking it was a fighter jet, but it was.
While it was on the runway.
Well, it just sort of taken off as a commercial aircraft. Sure, yeah. I don't think I dreamt that, but
one of your films
you
you've
might
been
have done.
watching.
Yeah. Might have done.
I do love a good film.
Does like a film.
Disaster.
That was on Netflix.
Yeah. But obviously, going forward, I know you're making some change in that sector, but obviously we're really pleased that you're supporting what we're doing as well, and a big part of Frontier going forward, supporting the SRMC and the students, and long may that continue.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. I'm ready for a new adventure.
We got one for you.
Yeah, that's always
without the travel.
You should never say that in front of you two.
No.
But I do feel that I'm kind of evolving into a new place, and I just want to not take my foot off the accelerator. But I've done the same thing for 20 plus years, and I do feel that I'm kind of evolving out of it and into a new space. I do a lot of conference work, and I enjoy that as well. So about sharing my experiences and working with students and that sort of thing. So as I said, evolving into the next generation.
Brilliant.
So I'm excited for the future.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that level of detail. It's been awesome chat.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gail.
Cheers, Gail.